My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are honored and delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Samir Handuja, who will be talking to you about cyberbullying prevention, navigating the intersection of AI, social media, and digital ethics. Please join me in a really warm welcome for our friend, Dr. Samir Handuja. Take it away, Samir.
Thank you, Charlene. It's so good to be here. I want to say I'm very grateful for your time tonight and joining me. I also want to say that there will be a lot that I would like to cover tonight, and we'll get to a lot of information, but I also want you to know that, I would love to come through for you in any capacity. Should you need any advice related to what you're dealing with in your own home, whether you'd like a suggestion about a specific resource, whether you need a how-to guide to understand a specific platform or how to take screen recordings for digital evidence purposes, whatever it is at the intersection of youth and technology, I stand at the ready to help. And we want to continue to assist you because it's a very challenging time. And as long as we keep coming around our children, coming around our teenagers and supporting them, I think we'll be okay. But just know that you don't have to do it alone. The second thing that I'll say before I share my slides is that I'm happy to get you these slides, happy to get you a number of other PDF resources as it relates to some of the content that I'm speaking about. All of it's available on our website. Everything on our website is for free. So just know that it isn't just me as a talking head today. We'll do some Q&A, and then we'll make sure that we get you the slides, and we'll make sure that we get you some other resources as well to help you. Those resources, they're not fluff, they're very actionable, because it's not worth my time or your time to bore you with things that you could just look up. We're all really hoping that this is going to be a productive session, again, keeping in mind that your time is valuable. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides now. And we'll minimize these toolbars so they're out of my way on Zoom. Perfect. Okay, thank you for your patience as I did that. Let's jump right into this. Last May, as you'll recall, our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, sent out an advisory related to social media. I think it was warranted, without a doubt. I mean, we're looking around and we're seeing a bit of a mental health crisis. We're seeing our youth struggle in a variety of contexts and spaces, and one of the major factors in their life is their social media use and is the time they're spending in a variety of interactive environments. Now, in that advisory, I do want to point out that while he did mention some of the negatives, he also mentioned some of the positives. Typically, that's skipped over, but there are positives to social media, and research is very clear about that. Ideally, our youth go online and they benefit from social media, from all of the various tools that are at their disposal, and they benefit academically, relationally, socially, and of course, to meet their entertainment needs. I want that to keep happening, and I also believe that it's helping them level up as we move deeper and deeper into this information-based society and economy. I mean, you would want your youth to be proficient on some level. I would want my own kids to be proficient on some level, and ideally not have to deal with trolls and people who make fun of them because of the fact that they're, in my case, Asian Indian, or give them a hard time because of how they look, etc. We want them to have healthy experiences. We want them to be able to enjoy those tools and those environments. So with this said, let's try not to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. And even though it's very easy to demonize specific companies for perhaps falling short, I think we can agree that, yes, there's more that they absolutely need to be done. And I'm hoping that the momentum we've seen over the last handful of months is compelling them to additional actions, bigger actions, so that our youth feel a lot more safe and are supported when it comes to their mental health. I also want to say that when it comes to platforms, it's very easy as a parent or guardian to feel overwhelmed because maybe your teenager tells you that they're now on this or that their friends are and they want an account. And you might be thinking to yourself, I don't even have the margin to try to vet this to make sure that it's safe and appropriate. And, we think about predators and we think about cyberbullies and so forth. What I'd like you to do, instead of being overwhelmed by all of these new emerging technologies, is to instead just focus on what you're good at, which is, trying to raise a decent human being with a moral compass, with someone who cares about integrity, doing the right thing, whether they're in public and everyone's staring at them, or whether they're in private. And of course, the golden rule is another one of my favorites, and I know it might sound a little bit naive to even bring up the golden rule, but I would say that it's a guiding principle, and more of our youth need that North Star. They need a guiding principle that they can keep coming back to. I know that as an adult, I'm proud of certain convictions that I've adopted and tried to live out. Maybe the rest of my life is falling apart, but I can still take pride in the convictions that I'm all about. And I think that would be the same for a teenager when so much of their life often seems like it's not in control. Well, they can control the type of person that they're becoming. When you think about cyberbullying, I don't need to get into some sort of academic discussion about the various ways it's been defined. I would just say that we think about traditional bullying in the classroom, in the hallway, um, lunchroom, etc. And we know that there's harm taking place and it's typically repeated and it's usually intentional. Well, cyberbullying is just all of that, but you additionally have the technology component, whether it's on a gaming console, whether it is on, again, a social media platform, whether it's via text, or of course, group chats is a big area of concern simply because not just of hurtful sentiments, but also exclusion and rejection and how that makes a young person feel. So we're seeing this obviously in a variety of contexts, and it is affecting our youth. We see that in our research, which I'll get to in just a second. Last year, we were able to collect brand new data, and we hope to do so again pending funding this upcoming fall. And so this is involving 5,000 middle schoolers and high schoolers across the nation. So I would say this gives us a pretty good picture of the average teenager in our country. On the left side of the chart, you can see that over the last month, about 1 out of 3 say that they've been bullied at school, and about 3 out of 4 say they've been bullied at school in their lifetime. If you look at the right side of the chart, the numbers are lower, and we're talking about online bullying, talking about cyberbullying. And typically it's 49% who have been cyberbullied in the last month and about 55% who have been cyberbullied in their lifetime. So what we tend to see, of course, during the lifetime, bullying is occurring more often, but we're also wondering, is there a trend where cyberbullying continues to be on the uptick, perhaps in part due to COVID and how we were all quarantined and distance learning was such a big deal. And our kids were just in front of screens so much more often. And of course, attempting to meet their relational needs through those screens. These are a lot of numbers. I get that, but this data is these data are so interesting to me. And again, we're happy to get you this information for you to pore over at your leisure. But you see cyberbullying at the very top. I just wanted to point out a few other data points that I think are interesting and should prompt our attention. Maybe conversations, maybe something a little bit more intentional. I'll start off with, we've got these targets who about 16% say that someone else posted mean names or comments online about them with a sexual meaning. So that gets me thinking about our conceptualizations of sexual harassment. And when you think about sexual harassment, perhaps you immediately think about a population of college students, or maybe one college student, or maybe adults in the workforce. You typically don't allow your mind to consider that, my goodness, this is happening amongst middle and high schoolers. And it's upsetting, right? Because we just want them to focus in on their schoolwork and their friendships and their extracurriculars and to find joy while they're a teenager before life gets challenging with all the responsibilities that are on my shoulders and your shoulders. Also, we see here about 14% say that someone else targeted them based on their race or their color. And about, let's say 9% said that they were targeted based on their religion. So unfortunately, and you and I can speculate and discuss some of those reasons as to why there's been an uptick in what we call identity-based harassment. Some of those reasons, it's just, there's a lot to say. And so I will save that for another conversation, but I simply want us to talk to our youth about it because they might be trying to engage in banter. They might be trying to make their buddies laugh. They might be trying to be a little bit sharp or pointed with a specific sentiment they want to express. But many times they cross a line and it's unacceptable. And in some jurisdictions, it's considered a hate crime, targeting individuals based on something about them that they cannot change. So please have these conversations if you haven't already. Yes, we would like to assume that our children see everyone the exact same and treat everyone with the same amount of value, but maybe that's not happening like we think it should. I'd also like to point out that about 23% said that someone, typically another teen, repeatedly contacted them via text or online. 14% said that someone stalked them online. And about 10% said that someone tracked or monitored their location or activities, not just, without you knowing about it, but after they told them to stop. Again, you and I would not want your typical middle schooler or high schooler here in the United States to be dealing with these sorts of problems, to be concerned about invasions of privacy, to be concerned about their own safety, to be living in some level of fear, because other users can implement technology or employ technology to track their whereabouts, to make them feel unsafe, often unintentionally. So another topic of conversation that I would like you to bring up with your kids. Who did youth tell? Well, on the far left, you see that 7 out of 10 talked to a parent, and about, let's say, 2 out of 5, maybe approaching 1 out of 2, talked to a friend. But in terms of talking to an educator, the findings are very disappointing. We see 16% talk to a counselor, 14% to a teacher, 14% to a principal or assistant principal, and 12% to somebody else at school. Meanwhile, about 11% didn't tell anyone. They just suffered silently. Now, I want to emphasize that these findings, as it relates to youth talking to educators, have remained this low for over a decade as we continue to study this. It's surprising, right? Because you can imagine so many adults are trying to identify themselves as point persons, saying, look, come to me, give me a chance to come through for you. Let's talk about a mutually agreeable action plan to get you out of this mess so that you can just keep living your life. But still, and I think it's largely because of fear of retaliation, fear of being labeled a tattletale, fear of this thing now going viral across the school because a teacher is not discreet about what he or she does with that information or what they do with that information. So I wish there was something to do, something we can do about disarming youth so that they're more willing to talk to adults at school, because I feel like they're in positions to help. If you have some ideas, we'd love to hear them. How did you respond to your most recent experience? Well, thankfully, 7 out of 10 block the aggressor. That should be closer to 100%. We see only about 31%, the third bar from the left, reported it to the site or the app. That also should be much closer to 100%. What we tend to find is that youth are hesitant to report it because they're feeling that maybe, just maybe, they will get outed. The person they're reporting on will find out that it's them who reported on them. But that's not the case. When you reach out to a platform, they keep everything invisible and they do the investigation, they see if it violates their terms of service, and then they action the violative content or the violated account, maybe banning that account. However, they're not proactively policing, hundreds of millions or even billions on some platforms of these accounts to make sure that all the conversations are healthy and joyful and everyone's being nice to each other. That's not happening, but they do have a responsibility to respond when we report it. So continue to remind your youth to do it, to know that it's going to be behind the scenes, and to also know on every platform the specific ways, because it might be a little bit different on Roblox. It might be a little bit different on Snapchat. It might be a little bit different. It is different on YouTube. And we just want our youth to be able to do it quickly. Honestly, if they don't, they're silently endorsing the behavior. They're allowing it to continue. That person's going to target the next person and the next person and the next person because maybe they were too busy or maybe they were too fearful to report. And then we're also seeing a lot of negative emotions as it relates to just sort of what stems from being targeted. Anger, frustration, embarrassment, sadness, loneliness, fear, anxiety. And what's key about this is that I'm a criminologist, and we know in the juvenile justice and criminology literature that when youth struggle with these heavy emotions, it just descends upon them like a fog, and they can't really think straight, and they can't figure their way out of it many times, in a healthy way at least. And so they end up maladaptively coping. They end up coping in some dysfunctional way, and it could be externalizing behaviors such as acting out, deviance, delinquency, but it also could be internalizing behaviors such as self-harm. And then I've been recently looking at all of this through the lens of trauma. And I think that since the CDC back in 2017 labeled traditional bullying an adverse childhood experience, I think it is important to consider cyberbullying in the same sort of light. You see here that the targets of cyberbullying, they have strong negative beliefs about themselves. They feel very upset when something reminds them of their previous victimization, have difficulty concentrating. It negatively affects their friendships, of course, and then they have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. Relatedly, they have strong physical reactions. They stop caring about stuff they used to love. It affects their schoolwork, and they have repeated disturbing and unwanted memories. Now, to be sure, this is not the majority of youth, but I think you would agree with me when I say that between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 4 and 1 out of 3 of youth are dealing with these consequences. That signals something pretty significant, something pretty severe about the strength of the impact related to this specific form of harm. Couple last data points, if you don't mind, and then we'll get into prevention. A shocking 20% have skipped school because of cyberbullying, and over half, 51%, when they were cyberbullied, it deeply affected their ability to learn and feel safe. So maybe educators really want to do something about this, and maybe parent groups, PTAs, et cetera, you want to do something about this. Perhaps you can use this data as evidence that, look, we can't just tell our kids to put down their phone or delete the app, stop spending so much time with their gaming console. It's happening. And just because they're maybe not on it doesn't mean they're not going to get targeted. And when they are targeted, they will hear about it. And it absolutely will affect their academic achievement, their attendance, and just their feelings of safety. Should that not compel us to action as a PTA, as a group of educators, as a school, as a district? So with all this said, let's think about what our next move is. What are we supposed to do in the face of these numbers? Especially if we might also agree that cyberbullying is, as I mentioned, going up at least a little bit. Well, the first thing that I like to do when I'm working with targets is to get them to take a deep breath. And now, to be sure, targeting or being targeted varies. It's on a continuum. It could be mild, it could be moderate, it could be severe. But I would say that much of what's happening in terms of the severity tends to be insults, name calling, mean comments, exclusion, rejection, etc. And so in that situation, when I'm working with a target, maybe it could be my own child, I immediately want to take them to the worst case scenario, because right now they're in that cloud of emotions and they can't think straight. And so if I could just help them understand what are the worst possible outcomes to what's happened here in terms of that negative comment after the picture you posted. Well, maybe they'll say it's going to be online forever, and everyone's going to see it, and everyone's going to judge me and treat me accordingly, and I'm going to be an outcast, and nobody's ever going to want to be my friend, and everyone's going to be talking about it, not just today and tomorrow and next week, but the rest of the school year, and then it's going to follow me as I go into, let's say, high school and then onward. Now, if we again take a step back, that's typically not what's going to happen. Just for a variety of reasons, when it comes to the attention spans of youth, when it comes to new topics, and so forth. And so we don't want to dismiss or trivialize the amount of struggle that youth is in right now. We want to validate their voice, validate their experience, but we also want them to, after they've worked through it for a little bit, those emotions, to get to a more logical and rational place. And so again, helping them to see this is the worst possible outcomes, and what we're probably going to experience is much less significant than that. Then hopefully it allows them to, again, calm down and to be able to proceed and again, focus on what they can control, which we'll talk about. I alluded to this, but the news cycle moves fast out of school, right? And so, yes, me, Samir, I could be picked on today. Sometimes I just have to keep my head down and focus on my classes. And yeah, maybe there's some waves of that tomorrow and the next day, but it's not going to last for that long. It's going to typically move on to the next kid, unfortunately, or the next incident. When you're an adolescent, you really do think, at least I did, that there's so much that we can control. People liking us, people loving us, people drawn to us, just if I wore the right clothes, just if I listened to the right music, just if I went to all the popular events. You realize as you get older that you can control so much less than you thought. Additionally, there's things that seem to really matter. What everyone's thinking about me, what everyone's saying about me. But then again, as you get older, and this of course is going to take time, just one conversation with your ninth grader after this talk, for example, is not going to change their worldview. But there's not a lot that truly matters. And so what I would rather our youth focus on is what's kind of in the middle, between things you can control and things that matter. When I was growing up, definitely I I was picked on. I was targeted in a variety of ways, and I'm sure each of you have your stories as well. But what could I control? I could not control the critics who are chirping on the sidelines. All I can control is the fact that I can do good on my academics. I can try to find joy in my extracurricular activities. I can help out around the house. I can help my mom and dad so that they're not struggling. I can find purpose and I can find meaning in a number of activities and continue to, again, grow in the best ways I know how. That's what I can control. I cannot control how popular I am. I cannot control how well liked I am. And by the way, it may not matter. It typically doesn't matter, as we all remember, after high school. So that leads me to my next point. Now is not forever, but I want to be honest. I do remember those middle school and high school years, and it felt like the days were dragging and the months were dragging, and it was just going to be an entire lifetime, during this short season. But if we can somehow, maybe through our own experiences or through, a cool aunt or a cool uncle or some other relative, whether it's a mentor or a youth pastor or someone in the community, a coach, maybe they can convey their stories, not long production type stories, but just short stories where it's like, you know what, I know things are hard right now, but I just want to spend a minute telling you a quick anecdote that comes to my mind about how, yeah, things were pretty awful and it felt like it was going to last for forever, but it didn't. And I just controlled what I could control. And I encourage you to do the same. I also think about what is filling our kids, our teenagers' buckets. And that brings me to the topic of friendships and relationships. And what's interesting is that, they have friendships, but then it seems that sometimes these friends are not true friends and they end up being the ones who are the aggressors. Or maybe they're the ones who are bystanders when another person is targeting our own kid. And we're like, wait a second, I thought you were actually my friend. Shouldn't you have stood up for me? But clearly, we see the truth. We see the true colors. So what I would say here is that I want our youth to just try to be, as they grow up, a little bit more discerning about their friendships. I would want them to be in bidirectional friendships and not in one-directional friendships. I would also not want them to glom on to someone who they feel is going to help them with their social status or move them up the social ladder. What we find in the research is that students who are able to move very easily and fluidly between friendship groups, instead of, again, holding on to this best friend or this group as if like, this gives me life, this is my identity, this is my squad, this is my crew, this is my everything. Again, those youth who are able to move fluidly between groups, they do so much better when they're adults. And plus, they're also able to deflect and not internalize the harm from any targeting that might happen because they realize they've got another group of friends who cares about them and sees value in them. They can just quickly move on because they weren't white knuckling it, holding on to that other group of friends who, again, ended up maybe eventually harming them with actions or with words. And then values, thinking about ethics, thinking about digital ethics. I think all of that ties into to values as well. And I mentioned that we don't want our youth to derive their identity and their self-worth based on what their peers think about us. But with all that said, we know that they care on some level. So if that's a truth, and it's something that we just have to acknowledge, how can we also, at the same time, get them more centered on things that won't change, things that are not variable, something that's like a bedrock, foundational values. And it could be stemming from faith. It could be stemming from how the parents and the guardians are raising that child. It could be stemming from who they want to be like, someone that you could really esteem. What I like to do when it comes to working with youth on values is I just use Google to find a list of values. And to be honest, there's many lists. There's a list of 20 values, 50 values, 100 values. Through experimentation, I found that starting with a shorter list is better. And then I might give them this list of, let's say, 18. And I say, okay, son, daughter, student, I just want you to look over this list and can you just circle 5 that are important to you? They really resonate with you. These are values that you'd like to build your life upon, foundations. And maybe you're not there yet. It's just a goal. It's aspirational. You want to move in a direction where you're more and more reflective of these specific values. Maybe it's leadership. Maybe it's kindness. Maybe it's gratitude, being grateful. Maybe it's hope. I want all youth to embrace that one, right? Because we can get through anything if we have hope. And maybe it's humility. So let's say you identify those 5. then life continues to happen. Positive and negative experiences with friends, with goal achievement, with families, with romantic relationships. Life is very complicated when you're a teenager, and all of those hit you very hard. And so sometimes you might want to act out. Sometimes you might wonder, how are you supposed to cope? But if you can keep bringing back your son or your daughter to these bedrock values that they agreed upon, then I think it provides them with that North Star. And again, we can't control so much about life, but we can control where we're aiming our ship, our vessel, again, towards those North Star types of principles. It's helped me in life. I believe it helps a lot of other teenagers as well. But if we're not intentional with doing an activity like this, then maybe they have these vague concepts and they might name one or so, but in the moment they kind of forget it because, again, it wasn't made permanent to them through this experiential activity. I'd like to also commend to you the work of Above the Noise, just a channel on YouTube, Above the Noise. And so, some of my colleagues over at the Center for Digital Thriving at Harvard Graduate School of Education, they have done a lot of work in this area, and they like to also recommend this specific organization because I think it's important, and you'll agree, that our kids have an understanding of how apps are designed psychologically to attract their engagement and to keep their engagement. They need to understand that there's various sorts of tricks employed. Maybe I don't want to really judge those tricks specifically because obviously all of us need to be growing in self-control, but we do understand when we're thinking about a youthful population that they are inherently more vulnerable than, let's say, me at my age, where I have developed self-control and I am able to set more firm boundaries. And so I would encourage you to watch this with your child. I don't have time to share it with you right now. And if you forget, you can always message me and say, hey, Samir, what was that video you recommended? But it's very instructive. There's also activities associated with common sense education, which kind of help a youth not only understand how typically apps are developed to keep the engagement and the stickiness, or to be sticky, but also how they might, if they ever move into the field of trust and safety or are part of a startup, can create an app with well-being and safety front and center. And I think more and more, obviously, app developers need to be doing that, and ideally are. Another video that I really like has to do with negative thinking. Maybe like me, you descended into these rabbit holes of negative thoughts when you were a teenager. And I think it's almost natural. It's almost natural to be more cynical and pessimistic rather than optimistic and hopeful when you're a teenager, because life is heavy at that age and life is brand new, and at least in terms of the heaviness. And so when it comes to negative thinking, it is very useful to work through these thinking traps with your child, with your teenager, so that they understand that they've got this tendency to personalize everything, when honestly, there's a number of reasons why you didn't get invited to that party, or why you didn't get as many likes on that video you uploaded as you thought, or why somebody didn't quickly or immediately respond to your text. There could be a million reasons. It's not necessarily your fault, or you are undesirable, or you're a reject, or you drive people away, or something like that. And also, all the pressure that youth put on themselves, they need to also identify that they're doing their best, and their best is good enough, and they don't need to feel all sorts of obligation with regard to how their peers want them to act or appear online. All or nothing thinking is another one. All my friends have better lives than me because all I see is the highlight reels, and I'm doing constant comparison on social media. So we understand that, but again, intentionally walking through our youth, walking through these thinking traps with our youth, I think is very powerful. And truly, they might not remember all 7 of them when you talk to them a month from now, but they will remember at least a couple. And then maybe you break it up again. And then over time, they're like, yes, I get it. And as we might know, this is part of cognitive behavior therapy, which of course is scientifically proven to make such a difference as we reevaluate and recalibrate and reinterpret what's going on. We might remember 20 years ago, the band Linkin Park. I definitely miss them. And they had this song called Breaking the Habit, which is such an amazing song. But I always think about that title when I think about youth and their technology use. So let me just share with you a few points. if you're thinking that your kid is spending way too much time with their devices. First off, they need to admit that they have a problem and that it's affecting their life. Maybe they won't, but you want to get them to that part. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to make much progress. I also think it's useful if they would leave their phone, for example, downstairs before going upstairs. Yes, I know that they use their phone for an alarm clock, but there's just so much of a strong tendency to check your phone in the middle of the night when you go to the bathroom or when you can't sleep. That, of course, doesn't really help when it comes to their circadian rhythm and their sleep health. And of course, it gets their mind spinning, which affects them emotionally and psychologically. Maybe when screen time limits were first released, you might have been like me, where you set them, but then over time you started to ignore them or override them. But they're there for a reason. They're there to help us to set parameters and boundaries. So we would want to help our youth stick to them in any way that we can. And we'll talk about how to do that in a second. Do not disturb, I think, is very important because, at least for me, trying to do non-derivative work that matters, I don't want to be disturbed. I want to have thoughts that are unique so I can try to solve unique problems. And if you're always being derailed, for example, by notifications, it's gonna constantly compromise your ability to lock into a problem and solve it, or remember the things you should remember to function as a human being. I have in the past deleted problematic apps, and I'll be honest with you, I've deleted X or Twitter simply because I personally was checking it too often as it relates to my news about my favorite sports teams. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's been, I'd say, I kid you not, 8 months, and I'm pretty positive I'm not going to reinstall it. I am able to, in my line of work, turn off all non-essential notifications. I do understand that many adults can't do that, but I think that many of our youth actually can. Sure, you need a notification when you receive a text or a voicemail or a phone call, but do you really need a notification when your friend has posted a new video or a photo? Probably not. And then this is key. I just feel like so many youth, yes, they love influencers and celebrities and athletes, and they follow so many of them, but some of them make that youth feel very bad about themselves when their posts pop up in their feed. I want youth to just sort of reflect as to what is not serving them, what is not helping them emotionally and psychologically, what is not inspiring, but is actually leaving them feel lousy, and unfollow those accounts. They need to take ownership. Tech-free zones in your house, maybe you already have them. In my house, it's obvious, not as obviously, but maybe you would assume it would be the dinner table, and it is the dinner table. And then minimalistic phones. Believe it or not, there's a trend across the United States where more and more kids are getting minimalistic phones to start off with. And I'll talk about that in a second. You can still install apps on them, but they're a lot more restricted. And then this is big. I don't know about you, but I'm all about rewards. And so I need to set some sort of reward in place if I want to do away with something that I love, but is not really helping me or serving me. And I also need my friends to check in with me. I need my family to check in with me. I kind of like them to give me a pat on the back when I've, let's say, fasted technology for a week or whatever it is that I decide to do. Stopped using a specific app that wasn't really helping me. I love feeling, encouraged and praised by my loved ones. And then I love, again, setting up that reward. So figure out what your kids might need when it comes to accountability, when it comes to rewards, and then let's try to implement that. I also like this book called 1,000 Hours Outside. That's just a goal that this author encourages us to have for a year. So in 2024, 1,000 hours outside. But here's the thing. Maybe that's just impossible, maybe even impractical. But let's say along the journey to get to 1,000 hours, you were outside for about 125 hours. Well, that's 125 hours in 2024 that maybe you wouldn't have been outside normally, just because, again, you had this front of mind and you were just trying to do better this year. I think it's worth a shot. That's me and my little girl, Maya. And, we like to go out on dates. And I trust that you're taking the time to go out with your children out on dates to their favorite coffee shop, to their favorite donut place or dessert place or gelato place, maybe to their favorite breakfast place. And the goal is to, of course, as you see here, not have the phone anywhere around, and just, of course, to invest in them, to care about them and ask them about, what apps are they loving these days? What apps are becoming a little bit more lame? What games are their friends enjoying? What do they think the next big thing is? doing so with a smile, with a positive, pro-social sort of encouraging tone, instead of being sort of squinty-eyed, pointing our fingers and casting, aspersions on this platform, or the fact that they use their device way too much. Once we do that, our kids will shut down and they will not want to open up to us. I also like to think about what we call vicarious supervision. My colleague Justin Patchen and I love that term that he came up with, Justin. And this is a picture of what it looks like. So we have a boy on a laptop. We presume that that boy is not looking at anything inappropriate because the stepdad or the dad or the uncle or whoever is sitting on the couch pretty close by. Now, what we would like is for the boy to never do anything inappropriate or wrong or unethical on their device, whether or not that other adult figure is in the room. That's the goal, right? That's what we want. So we tried to study this with a couple of questions. Do you know what your parents are doing online? And for those kids who said never or half the time they know what I'm doing online, they engaged in a lot more cyberbullying and a lot more sexting. But those kids who said they know what I'm doing online most of the time or always, well, they cyberbullied and sexted a lot less. We also asked, is there an adult in your life you definitely would not want to disappoint? And you see here that when they said, yes, definitely, there's an adult, at least one in my life that I don't want to disappoint, they participated in a less frequent amount of cyberbullying and sexting. So it does matter. It absolutely matters. And so we just have to continue to build those relationships and leverage those relationships to induce them to act in the ways we'd like them to act. Hopefully they'll eventually realize it's for their own good. The last topic I want to discuss has to do with generative AI. So obviously it is all the rage. We understand that. And I trust that, Silicon Valley and the counties and the towns around you, you have probably experimented with a number of these, whether it's image generation, whether it is, text generation. And so just thinking about the large language models and the large multimodal models that are out there, and the tools that serve as front ends for us to use to type in inputs and to get outputs for us to use. It's wonderful and it's exciting, and these technologies are going to continue to improve. And so with all that said, there's some data I thought was really interesting. FOSI, the Family Online Safety Institute, worked with some research partners last July. And we see, last July at least, that it was about 2 out of 3 parents and teens had used generative AI. And what are they using it for? Well, they're using it for analytic, creative, and efficiency boosting tasks. But this was also interesting. Let's say over 1 out of 3 used it for emotional support, and almost 1 out of 3 of teens used it for emotional support. So let me say that again. Over 1 out of 3 parents and a little bit less than 1 out of 3 teens used it for emotional support. Maybe like me, you've typed into Google, various sorts of questions when you have felt just sort of like, what am I to do in this situation? And Google's not going to really know the specifics of whatever problem you're facing, but it's just a way to kind of vent and to seek a little bit of help, maybe even a little bit of comic relief. But here's the kicker. 2 out of 3 say that it's going to be a vital skill to have. They talk about learning how to prompt engineer, learning how to describe exactly what it is that you want in enough detail and proper detail so that the model is able to generate, to give you what you want. So I was on Snapchat a while ago, and they have My AI, which is just a conversational agent. We're seeing more and more companies use these conversational agents for customer service. And, recently I wrote a blog on how some teenagers are going to virtual girlfriends and boyfriends bots, AI bots, in order to maybe practice how to talk to someone that they have a crush on, or maybe to learn how to flirt better, or something like that. Maybe even to meet their emotional and psychological needs because they're struggling when it comes to romantic interest in the real world. So with all that said, I wanted to ask the My AI, the conversational bot in Snapchat, that, I'm doing a talk. What do you suggest that I say to them about Gen AI? And they said, you should talk about the positives and you should talk about maybe some of the concerns. And so that is what I'm going to do here. I've written multiple blogs on this topic. I would love to send them your way. I mentioned that write-up related to virtual girlfriends and boyfriends that, again, teenagers are now using, bots, that is. I've written about the top 10 major cases of generative AI misuse, which I think are very instructive. I've written about what platforms and users can do when it comes to generative AI harm. So don't hesitate to reach out to me related to that. But you saw a picture of my girl Maya. I wanted to just see if we could get Gen AI to generate a picture of, or to create a picture of Maya on a unicorn, because she loves unicorns right now. And this is what it spit out. And I'm pretty happy with that. And she's pretty happy with that as well. But let's get into possibilities in just a couple of minutes before we open it up for Q&A. I do want to emphasize that these are possibilities. Yes, we've seen some misuse cases, and I'll talk about a couple of them. I'll talk about them generally in a second here. But what we're trying to do as social scientists and as people in this field is just make sure that we're in front of possible problems. Harassment and cyberbullying. You can envision how, if there's all of these bots that you can create and then enlist to go into a channel and flood that channel or flood a user with all sorts of hateful comments and content, just absolutely inundate them, bombard them, then that could cause some severe emotional harm to them. They might not feel they could extricate themselves from that specific chat channel or environment. And some of the things that are said might be extremely painful, extremely cruel and malicious. Hate speech as well. It could be it could be words, but it also could be images. It could be images that trigger trauma in a specific individual of a particular religion or a particular race. And you and I can let our imaginations go in that direction to think about what those images or that video content could look like, which could deeply, deeply upset someone, again, of a certain background. And then deepfakes. In that write-up, I just mentioned about how I identified 10 major or 10 top misuses or misuse cases of generative AI. Deepfakes were a big one. We've got video deepfakes, we've got audio deepfakes, simply where an individual, it's made to seem like that person is saying something that they never said. So if we have a president, if we have a celebrity, if we have, a governor, if we have someone with a platform who says something that offends, that stirs up controversy, that creates panic, well, that obviously will lead to a whole heck of a lot of problematic consequences, severe consequences, and possibly even the loss of life, depending on what is said and depending on what sort of emotions and consequent actions are drummed up. Catfishing, if you're not familiar with that term, it simply means that individuals pose as somebody else to try to gain your affections, and then all of a sudden they extort you, or they try to derive something else of gain from you, all by, again, being duplicitous about their real identity, about who they are. And then sextortion, that's where nudes that might be sent to a trusted partner, let's say, eventually get released or are then leaked to somebody else, who then messages you and, of course, blackmails you and says that if you don't give me more money or more sexual content, then I'm going to release these pictures or videos out into the wild. So all this can be automated. All of this can be almost even perfected when it comes to the right language to use to actually trick an unsuspecting user to believe that, okay, this is a real person and this is a true relationship, and that I am falling in love and they're flirting with me and they're sending me nudes to deepen intimacy. And so I should do the same. And then bam, they're victimized. Doxing as well. So all of these large language models, they're being trained on gigantic corpuses of data, and we're hoping that there's not really any personal or private information in there, or that parameters are set so that when I type in an input and I'm expecting an output, the outputs are constrained to never give away any permutation of a personal phone number or address or social security number, or anything like that. Well, it remains to be seen, right? It remains to be seen if they're always going to be perfectly secure. And then report brigading and dogpiling simply means you can automate a mass reporting of an individual and accuse them of doing something incredibly awful, which then gets them banned from a platform that means so much to them, that they love, that maybe they are even running a business off of to support them and their family, and maybe a bunch of other employees as well. But if you're reported by many, many people for something, maybe that gets you kicked off, maybe that gets you banned, and you have to struggle, just like with identity theft victimization, to prove that you didn't do anything wrong. And identity thefts and scams can be automated as well. And then I imagine that as we approach the election in November, we're going to see just this gigantic spate of misinformation. And we're trusting that the platforms are able to properly label that, and people are able to make wise decisions and critical thinking related decisions about the information that comes across their screens. We also might worry about job security as well as overall loss of critical thinking skills, because I think about my college students. Are they just writing essays based on what is spit out through the prompts they type in? It remains to be seen, and I'm very tempted as I approach the summer semester and the fall semester to only have oral exams in front of me so they're not reading from a teleprompter app. That's for another conversation as well. But bottom line, these should be on your radar. And I hope that on some level you do broach this conversation. Don't think you need to be an expert on them or on the technology. Oftentimes, your teenager or child, they will know a lot and they will run with it. Right now, I'm not too concerned about AI surpassing humans. Prevention tips, my very last points. Try to use these tools together. They are fun. They're so fun to generate images or to generate voices, for example, on some websites, which sound like us or sound like somebody else, and get them to say positive things. We need to talk to them about the appropriateness of prompts, what they're typing in, what they're trying to generate. Never give these systems information that they can then index and add to their model. And also know that there could be bias when it comes to what the data on which these models are trained. I think we all understand that. Hallucinations just simply means false information that's spit out to us. We cannot just take it as they say, gospel or truth. We've got to critically evaluate, and that's a skill. And so ideally, they're learning through media literacy curriculum, through digital literacy, what exactly is truth, what is fact, and what is fiction as well. We don't want them just to parrot back what they see online. They've, of course, got to evaluate whatever output it is that's generated. Unethical use, I'm thinking about plagiarism, but I also mentioned those harms previously. And then always ask the tool for sources and provide those sources. Make sure that you disclose use, student, son, daughter, to the school. Let us know how you're using it for brainstorming, for outlining, for image generation, etc. Have a skepticism with bots. You cannot trust everyone, and everyone is not a human, even though they might seem very realistic with how they're engaging with you. And then we all have heuristics in terms of being able to tell, this seems a little bit amiss. That video is a little bit jittery, a little bit, I'm sensing something is wrong there. And so it very well could be a deep fake. And as a parent or guardian, please just stay involved. Takes a village. I'm grateful for your time this evening. And you know that we are co-laboring in this together. So don't hesitate to reach out. Here's my contact information, and we will take some Q&A. Thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hinduja. That was wonderful. And look at all these lovely, this is the best part of technology, right? All the floating.
It is. Let me stop sharing.
We love that your advice is so grounded and so value driven. That is really important for parents like us who are worried about our kids. So my first question, Samir, is there really such a thing as safe social media use? I mean, I know we're using that phrase tonight, but it feels like whack-a-mole with all the new apps coming out for kids. What do you say about that?
Maybe safe is a misnomer, because when we use the term safe, maybe it seems like we're promising that a child will always be safe. And you and I, we can't ever promise that. And so perhaps we should use safer or wiser. The goal is to keep, again, leveling up, to keep getting better and better and more cognizant of potential risks, potential harms, potential actions that me or my child can engage in that opens them up, that makes them more vulnerable. And so ideally, they're also growing when it comes to best practices for, digital citizenship or digital ethics, as was brought up before. And we have to help them. We have to support them. And we have to fill in the gaps. The school, I think schools are doing their part without a doubt, but schools need a united front. If the messaging is only coming from the school and then at home, it's sort of free reign, willy-nilly, they can do whatever they want with devices, it's going to lead to some problems.
All right. And so, Samir, you're a dad. How do you feel about apps that block or limit kids' social media or online use?
I think if it's required because they continue to violate your trust, it might be employed as a disciplinary measure. Additionally, if my children are younger, they haven't shown me that they deserve all of these freedoms, and I truly can't trust them. And it's no slight on them. It's simply because they're young and they haven't lived through many experiences and figure out how to best negotiate them. And so for that reason, I would use various sorts of software as necessary to provide blocks.
All right. I mean, I know our friend Dr. Deborah Heitner, author of, I can't remember the name of her book, sorry, but she advises that kids get a phone that doesn't have internet so they learn to text before they get some of those options. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a good practice. One of the dominant questions that I'm sure Devorah and I and Charlene, you and Bev, and the one you get most often probably is, when should I give my kid a phone and when should I start them on social media? And so just as you're saying, I think it's always a good idea to start them off, very slow with texting and maybe video chat, for example, Skype or FaceTime. And then as they prove that they're trustworthy, you might open them up for a little bit more access, and then give it another 6 months, open them up for a little bit more access. I do think it's important, and I'll be brief here, that we remember that as a teenager, we wanted to have more freedoms because we were growing in independence. We didn't want to be completely constrained and stifled by our parents. And that is what actually deeply affected us in negative ways. So if we're proving that we're worthy of the trust which we so desperately want as a teenager, then I think that that those freedoms should be extended to us slowly but surely.
All right, thank you. Bev just posted the name of Devorah's book is Growing Up in Public. That is a great book. That's a great book. So, Samir, my daughter is a young adult. She took herself off of all social media 5 years ago. Her brother said, no way, she'll be back in 2 months. She's never gone back. It turns out, I think that there is a movement afoot, right? Where people are doing that. Can you comment again on that kind of phone that you mentioned that doesn't have all the bells and whistles?
Sure. I'll give you a few names. And again, I have no relationships with these companies. I've just evaluated them. One would be the Bark phone. The Truby phone is another one that comes to mind. I'm trying to think of some of the others. I'll think about them in a second, and I'll type them into the chat as they occur to me. But what they do is they allow the parent to get much more information in terms of reporting as to what the child is up to on that phone. And additionally, you can install some apps like Duolingo or Kindle, etc. And so that allows you to provide the educational access that your child needs, but without all of the other sort of maybe fluff, like you were saying, or not that you were saying, but that I'm sort of implying that some of it is just unnecessary and not really serving you, not really helping you, actually making you feel worse about the situation instead of better.
Okay, fair enough. So, Dr. Hinduja, we have amazingly come to the end of our hour today. You are so listenable and so actionable. We really appreciate that. So my final question to you is, as a parent, as an expert, as a researcher, if you could wave your magic wand and offer parents one piece of advice about cyberbullying and safe social media, what would it be?
I actually wouldn't go in the direction of technology. I just always tend to feel that as long as we take the time to carve out margin in our lives to be invested in our kids, and that just means conversations, that means time spent doing the things that they love, which might very well be gaming, which you might consider to be a waste of time. But when you love someone, you show interest in the things that they love. And I think just having that relationship will help them in so many ways, because number one, they will not want to disappoint you. Number two, they will feel more comfortable coming to you when they're ever in some sort of tough situation. And number three, through those conversations, you will over time be showing them integrity. You'll be showing them what it means to be an upstanding individual. And I think that will inspire them to be that. So I wouldn't go in the direction of, technology. I would just say continue to be highly invested and spend a lot of time with your child as best as you can.
Well, Samir Hinduja, that is a really beautiful answer from somebody who studies cyberbullying for a living. You're saying really to invest in the personal relationships with your children and family, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's everything.
All right. Well, listen, that is a wonderful note to end on. Obviously, everybody agrees with that. And parents and educators, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Special thanks to the Fremont Union High Schools District and Rita Allen. Thank you. Thank you. And
thank you, Rita.
Most especially to you, Dr. Hinduja, for providing us such a wonderful evening with so many resources. Parents, you'll be hearing from us when the video posts. And thank you in advance for sharing these amazing slides. Take care, everybody.